In August 2025, America stands at a constitutional crossroads. Who controls the power to tax and regulate trade, Congress or the President? President Trump's sweeping tariffs, imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, have triggered a crisis, bypassing Congress entirely. The Supreme Court case Voss Elections v. RAS will decide not just the fate of billions in tariffs, but the future balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. As the world watches, the outcome will shape the price of goods, global markets, and the very definition of presidential authority for generations. The framers of the Constitution, wary of unchecked executive power, gave Congress, not the President, the authority to tax and regulate commerce. This power of the purse was designed as a safeguard against tyranny, ensuring economic policy would be shaped by public debate and accountability. For nearly 2 centuries, Congress set tariffs and trade policy, providing stability and predictability for businesses and foreign partners. The current crisis marks a sharp break from this tradition, as the President's unilateral tariffs challenge the founders' vision. Legal experts warn that this shift threatens the careful separation of powers established in 1787. The fight over tariffs is a modern test of whether Congress's constitutional authority can withstand the pressures of expanding executive power. The stakes, whether the founders' system of checks and balances can survive in today's political climate. The erosion of congressional control over trade was gradual, fueled by Congress delegating emergency powers to the President throughout the 20th century. The IEPA, passed in 1977, was meant as a narrow tool for true emergencies, like freezing assets of hostile regimes, not for broad economic policy. Over time, presidents stretched the definition of national emergency, and Congress rarely pushed back. What began as a scalpel for crises became a sledgehammer for sweeping policy changes. By 2025, the legal framework allowed a president to claim vast authority over trade, setting the stage for today's showdown. The founders' checks and balances weakened not by a single act but by decades of small concessions. Now the question is whether those guardrails can be restored. President Trump declared global trade competition a national emergency, using the IEPA to impose tariffs on over 90 countries without Congress. This unprecedented move rattled global markets and strained alliances as tariffs hit even close partners. The administration argued it was protecting American jobs, but critics saw executive overreach. The crisis peaked in August 2025, when a 50% tariff on all Indian imports sent supply chains into chaos and threatened U.S.-India relations. For many businesses, this was the breaking point, turning disruption into existential threat. The India tariff galvanized a coalition of companies to challenge the administration in court. The core issue: if economic competition is an emergency, are there any limits to presidential power? The legal battle was set for the Supreme Court. In a bold move, a coalition of businesses, led by the small but determined wine importer Voss Elections, filed a lawsuit against the administration. Their argument was clear. The tariffs imposed on imported goods were not just a matter of policy, but a violation of the Constitution itself. At the heart of their case was a fundamental principle. Tariffs are, in essence, taxes. And according to the Constitution, only Congress has the authority to levy taxes, not the President. The businesses argued that the President's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, was a dramatic overreach. They claimed these emergency powers were never meant to be used for sweeping trade policy, but rather for genuine national crises. The U.S. Court of International Trade agreed with the businesses. In a significant ruling, the court declared that a general trade conflict with another country does not amount to a national emergency under the IEPA. Refusing to back down, the administration quickly appealed the decision. As the legal battle continued, the tariffs remained in effect, impacting businesses and consumers across the country. When the case reached the federal circuit, judges pressed the government's lawyers with tough questions. If a trade deficit could be considered an emergency, they asked, then what couldn't be? This skepticism from the bench signaled a deep concern within the judiciary about the potential for unchecked executive power and the precedent such a case could set. With the stakes higher than ever, the stage was set for a dramatic Supreme Court showdown, one that would ultimately define the boundaries of presidential authority in matters of trade and emergency powers. The outcome of this landmark case would have sweeping implications, not just for the businesses involved, but for the very foundation of the separation of powers in American government. At the Supreme Court, both sides presented starkly different visions of presidential power. The administration argued the IEPA gives the president broad discretion to address economic threats, citing increased customs revenue as proof of success. President Trump warned of economic disaster if the tariffs were overturned. The business coalition countered that the Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to tax and regulate commerce. They argued the IEPA was being twisted into a loophole for executive overreach. Legal scholars warned that allowing this would create an imperial presidency, undermining the separation of powers. The IEPA, they noted, was meant to limit, not expand, emergency powers after Watergate. The core question: can the president unilaterally impose taxes by declaring an economic emergency? The court's answer would set a precedent for generations. The impact of the tariff war stretches far beyond legal arguments and government offices. It's woven into the daily lives of businesses, workers, and families across the country. Every corner of the economy, from bustling city centers to quiet suburban neighborhoods, has felt the effects. Tariffs have added a staggering $18 billion a month in new taxes, and the burden has landed squarely on the shoulders of U.S. businesses and consumers. For many, these costs are not just numbers on a spreadsheet, they translate into real financial strain and tough decisions. Small and medium-sized companies, often operating on thin margins, have struggled to absorb these extra expenses. Many have been forced to lay off workers, raise prices, or put expansion plans on hold. Some have even closed their doors for good, unable to compete in this new environment. For families, the consequences are felt every time they shop for groceries, fill up their gas tanks, or buy household essentials. Prices on everything from food to electronics have climbed, stretching budgets thinner and making it harder to keep up with the rising cost of living. The tariffs, originally intended to protect American jobs, have instead acted as a regressive tax, hitting lower and middle-income households the hardest. For many, it means making sacrifices, cutting back on spending, or dipping into savings just to get by. If the Supreme Court overturns the tariffs, the economic landscape could shift dramatically. Businesses might receive over $100 billion in refunds, providing a much-needed boost for investment, hiring, and growth. This could spark new opportunities and help communities recover. A ruling against the administration could also mean lower prices for consumers and a surge in imports, especially in industries like shipping and logistics that have been squeezed by higher costs and supply chain disruptions. The economic stakes are enormous. The court's decision will either prolong costly trade friction or deliver a much-needed financial reprieve for millions. The outcome could shape the direction of the U.S. economy for years to come. The ripple effects will touch every sector: agriculture, manufacturing, technology, retail, and beyond. No industry will be left untouched by what happens next. For millions of Americans, the Supreme Court's verdict won't just be a headline. It will be a reality felt at the kitchen table, shaping their financial future and daily lives. As the nation awaits the Supreme Court's decision, Voss Selections v. RAS stands as a defining test of American democracy. The case has captured the attention of citizens, lawmakers, and legal scholars alike, sparking debates across the country about the very nature of power and accountability in our government. The verdict will determine whether the president can use emergency powers to bypass Congress on major policy issues. At stake is the delicate balance between swift executive action and the foundational principle that no single branch should dominate the others. A ruling for the administration would expand executive authority, allowing future presidents to sidestep the legislative process on everything from trade to climate policy. Supporters argue this flexibility is necessary in times of crisis, enabling leaders to act decisively when urgent challenges arise. Critics warn this would erode the checks and balances that protect liberty. They fear that concentrating too much power in the executive could set a dangerous precedent, undermining the safeguards that have preserved American freedom for generations. A ruling against the administration would reaffirm Congress's constitutional role and restore balance to federal power. It would send a clear message that the legislative branch remains a vital check on executive ambition, ensuring that the voices of the people, through their elected representatives, are not sidelined. The decision will shape not just the economy, but the very health of American democracy. Its impact will ripple through financial markets, public policy, and the daily lives of millions, influencing how future leaders govern and how citizens engage with their government. The stakes are immense for businesses, families, and the future of the republic. Every American, whether directly involved or not, will feel the effects of this landmark ruling in some way. The story of Voss Selections v. RAS is a pivotal chapter in the ongoing experiment of American self-government, reminding us that democracy is not static, but a living system shaped by the choices we make and the principles we defend.